Have you ever noticed how spirituality changes not only what we believe, but also what we choose to leave behind? Spiritual awakening is not just about learning new truths, but also about letting go of the illusions that keep us trapped. Carl Jung once said, "What you resist persists." Often, we hold on to habits that no longer serve us simply because we fear who we might become without them. But there comes a point in our spiritual journey when these old beliefs start to lose their grip, and we realize that in order to grow, we must let go of certain things. Not abruptly, but gradually, like a snake shedding its skin. In this video, we will explore the 8 habits that spiritually awakened people slowly abandon. Some are easy to recognize, while others are subtle, hidden in the way we think, react, and relate to the world. By the end, you may notice which of these habits are still present in your life and how freeing yourself from them can accelerate your spiritual evolution. Shall we begin? For a long time, we have sought approval. We grew up hearing praise for good grades, exemplary behavior, and meeting others' expectations. The need for validation seeps into our lives early on, and without realizing it, it shapes our actions, making us dependent on others' opinions. Before spiritual awakening, external validation feels like fuel. We want to be seen, recognized, and admired. However, as our awareness expands, a question arises. Why does our happiness depend so much on external approval? During this awakening process, we begin to realize that this need for validation is a subtle form of imprisonment. There is no true freedom when we live to meet others' expectations. Gradually, the search for acceptance loses its grip. We start to understand that true validation doesn't come from likes, compliments, or social approval, but from our connection with ourselves. Inner silence becomes more important than the noise of external opinions. What was once a constant concern, "What will people think of me?" dissolves in the face of a new question, "What do I think of myself?" And this is where transformation begins. Letting go of the need for external validation doesn't mean we stop caring about others. It means we learn to distinguish between what comes from the ego and what comes from the soul. We begin to act from authenticity rather than from a need for approval. And ironically, when we stop seeking acceptance, we start attracting more genuine connections. The spiritual path teaches us that no one can give us a more powerful validation than the one we find within ourselves. But this is a lesson we learn gradually, as we release our dependence on external validation and learn to trust our own worth. In modern times, distraction isn't just an option. It's an addiction. We are surrounded by notifications, glowing screens, and endless commitments. There is always something to watch, something to read, something to do. But behind this avalanche of stimuli, there is a pattern, the need to escape. Before spiritual awakening, many people live in a state of constant numbness. Every moment of silence is quickly filled with a distraction. Social media, excessive work, endless TV shows. The goal isn't necessarily entertainment, but rather avoiding the discomfort of being alone with oneself. Silence can be frightening for those who have never learned to listen to their own thoughts. That's why we create such busy routines, leaving little time to reflect on our own existence. After all, if there's no time to look within, there's also no time to confront our pain, fears, and shadows. Carl Jung once said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul." And throughout the spiritual journey, this behavior becomes increasingly clear. We realize that we aren't just busy, we are running from something. The change happens gradually. We begin to value moments of solitude. We learn to listen to silence, to observe our thoughts without judgment. We discover that introspection isn't a threat but a bridge to self-knowledge. The more we allow ourselves to slow down, the more we understand that inner peace doesn't come from external stimuli but from the ability to be present with ourselves. And over time, what once felt like a frightening emptiness transforms into a sacred space for growth and transformation. The desire to always have more is deeply rooted in society. We are taught to measure success by what we accumulate: houses, cars, clothes, titles. The more we have, the more successful we appear to be. But does this mindset truly make us happy? Before spiritual awakening, attachment to material possessions seems natural. We believe that security comes from financial stability and that comfort depends on what we own. We buy to fill voids, to project an image, to feel valued. But something interesting happens along the spiritual journey. We begin to realize that life's most meaningful moments aren't found in the things we own, but in the experiences we live. Connection with others, inner peace, and genuine joy. None of these can be bought. The shift doesn't happen all at once. It doesn't mean rejecting everything material, but rather learning to let go. We start seeing possessions as tools rather than definitions of who we are. And in doing so, we experience a kind of freedom that consumption could never provide. When we stop seeking meaning in external things, we discover a much more valuable treasure within ourselves. Over time, the need to accumulate fades and is replaced by something far more powerful: the desire to live with purpose. The desire to control everything is an illusion. We spend much of our lives trying to plan every detail, predicting scenarios and setting expectations. We believe that if we have everything under control, we can protect ourselves from suffering. Before spiritual awakening, this need for control feels almost instinctive. We want to make sure everything happens the way we expect, we want to avoid surprises, and we want life to follow the script we have written for it. But over time, we realize that this attempt at control is a kind of prison. Life will never unfold exactly as planned, and resisting this reality only creates anxiety and frustration. True awakening happens when we learn to trust in the flow of life, in divine timing, in the idea that even when things don't go our way, they are unfolding as they need to. This is not about passivity, but about balance. We do our part, make decisions, and move forward, but without rigidly clinging to the outcome. We accept that some things are beyond our reach, and instead of fighting against this, we find peace in acceptance. Carl Jung once said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." Often, what frustrates us the most is exactly what we need to learn to let go of. When we release the need for control, we become lighter. Life stops being a battle against the unexpected and turns into a dance with the unknown. And in this space of surrender, true magic happens. Before spiritual awakening, many people remain trapped in relationships that drain their energy. Friendships built on competition, family bonds filled with guilt and demands, romantic relationships where the fear of being alone outweighs the genuine desire to be together. We cling to these connections because we believe it's normal to tolerate disrespect, always give in, or carry the emotional burdens of others. Often, we confuse love with obligation, thinking that maintaining a relationship, even a painful one, is a sign of loyalty and compassion. But as we evolve, we start to realize that not all connections are meant to last. Some people come into our lives to teach us lessons, and part of that learning is knowing when to let them go. The process of distancing isn't always immediate. First comes the realization of how a particular relationship limits or exhausts us. Then, an internal conflict arises. Do we have the right to walk away? Are we being selfish? Over time, we understand that prioritizing our well-being is not an act of selfishness but of self-love. The transformation happens when we begin attracting people who align with our new frequency, relationships built on genuine exchange, mutual growth, and respect. We realize that being alone is not as frightening as staying stuck in connections that weaken us. As we progress on our spiritual journey, we learn that relationships shouldn't be maintained out of obligation. We choose to be around those who uplift us, support us, and allow us to grow without losing ourselves. From an early age, we are conditioned to believe that certain emotions should be hidden. Showing sadness is seen as weakness, feeling anger is a lack of control, and expressing vulnerability is a risk. As a result, we learn to silence our feelings, to hold back our tears, and to mask what we truly feel. At first, emotional suppression seems like an effective defense mechanism. We build an emotional armor to avoid judgment and appear strong. But what happens when we hide our emotions for too long? They don't disappear. On the contrary, they accumulate in our subconscious, waiting for the right moment to surface. Over time, we realize that true strength doesn't come from pretending nothing affects us. It comes from recognizing and embracing our feelings without fear. We learn to give space to sadness without letting it consume us. We allow anger to show us where our boundaries are. We let vulnerability be a bridge to deeper and more authentic connections. At first, allowing ourselves to feel can be uncomfortable. But as we break the habit of suppressing our emotions, we discover a kind of freedom we've never experienced before. There is no longer a need to maintain a facade. No more carrying the weight of buried emotions. Only the lightness of being whole with everything we feel and everything we are. The need to belong is one of the deepest human desires. We want to be accepted, respected, and loved. And often we sacrifice parts of ourselves to meet others' expectations. We shape our personalities to fit into social spaces, adjust our opinions to avoid conflict, and silence our truths to keep from displeasing others. Without realizing it, we make small concessions, giving up little pieces of ourselves that, over time, pull us further away from who we truly are. We create a socially acceptable persona, but behind it, there is an emptiness, the disconnection from our true essence. At some point, we begin to question, are we living to please others or to be authentic? Are we choosing our own paths or just following scripts that were imposed on us? At first, expressing who we truly are can be intimidating. But gradually, we realize that there is no greater freedom than living in alignment with our own truth. And when we allow ourselves to be authentic, something extraordinary happens. We start attracting the right people and opportunities. Those who love us for who we truly are will stay, while those who were only drawn to the mask we once wore will naturally drift away. Letting go of the habit of compromising our authenticity gives us back something essential, the right to be ourselves, without fear, without disguises, and without sacrifices that pull us away from our own essence. Few fears are as universal as the fear of death. From an early age, we are taught to see it as a tragic end, a terrifying mystery, something to be avoided at all costs. The uncertainty of what happens afterward leaves many living under a constant shadow of anxiety and dread. Death is seen as an irreparable loss. We fear losing those we love, we fear our own end. We create distractions to avoid thinking about it, but deep down the fear lingers. As our awareness expands, our perspective on death begins to shift. We no longer see it as an absolute end but as a transition, a natural cycle of existence. We come to understand that life is not limited to the physical body and that there is something greater than what we can see and touch. With this understanding, fear loses its grip. Instead of avoiding the subject, we accept its inevitability. And paradoxically, this acceptance teaches us to live more fully. When we stop fearing death, we begin to cherish each moment with greater intensity. Spiritual awakening doesn't erase the pain of loss, but it gives us a new perspective. Instead of seeing death as a conclusion, we start to recognize it as part of a greater flow, a mystery that doesn't need to be feared, but rather respected and understood. Each of these habits has been built over a lifetime, and letting go of them takes time. But every step on this path leads us toward a lighter, more authentic, and truer existence. Spiritual awakening is not a destination but a continuous process of learning and transformation. And as we walk this path, we realize that the more we let go of what no longer serves us, the more space we create for what truly matters. Each layer we shed brings us closer to who we really are.